Hi, I'm Victoria. I'm a child psychiatrist and a parent coach, and I'm also a mum. And for the next weeks, I'm going to be doing some Christmas related videos because we're in that season. You're probably all doing the Christmas shopping. If you're like me, maybe you're more organised and you've already done it, but I certainly haven't. And I thought it'd be quite helpful to do some Christmas related videos because actually, Christmas is a very big family time. It's a big thing for kids of different ages. And really, I think sometimes we miss the point a little bit with it, or sometimes it can cause a lot of difficulties. So today I wanted to talk about presents. There's a lot of conversations about presents, should you be buying them? If you're very eco-aware, you'll be thinking about whether you should be buying things at all, or whether you should be getting experiences or second-hand things and stuff like that. So I just wanted to talk about what actually matters to kids when it comes to buying prezzies, what kind of prezzies, and so that it makes it easier for you to make the choices that you need to make to feel like your kids aren't really missing out. So if you're interested in that, please stay tuned. Present giving is really about being kept in mind. That's the reality of it. It doesn't really matter whether the present you're giving is a physical thing or whether it is an experience, whether it's second hand, whether you've made it yourself, whatever it is, it's about being kept in mind. And what do I mean by that? It's really an opportunity to show your sensitivity to your child. To be honest, this is true of any presents. It's not just Christmas presents, birthday presents, whatever it is. But I think it is important at Christmas because there is a lot of expectation on it. And it's really about whether what you're giving to your child lets them know that you know them really well, that you understand what they like, that you understand what really matters to them. This can be a bit difficult because certainly for younger children, especially when they're early on in primary school, sometimes presents are about being included in a you have this thing, so everyone has this thing. And I think that can become difficult because you can be quite attuned to that. You can know that your child is really desperate to have some sort of toy because everyone has it, and you might feel strongly that you don't want to buy toys or you don't want to buy things for Christmas, for example. And it can be a bit difficult to marry the two up, but usually children will obviously have a range of different interests, so you can pick something that they have an interest in that's different. And if you are someone who wants to teach your child about the value of being eco-aware, for example, of not having too many things or to not always have what other people have, then I guess Christmas is quite a good time to do that because they probably will be upset they're not getting the thing that they want. But if you have got them something that really shows them that you understand all of them, that you understand the other things that matter to them, that are personal to them, then it can be a really powerful message. Because often the things that kids want, that because their friends want it, that's much more about fitting in. And fitting in is important. It's important to see that as something that matters because even for small children like toddlers, when they're about 3 or they're getting to 4 or 5, certainly in primary school, and certainly for teenagers, fitting in is a really big thing. We're very social animals. We do like fitting in. But there's something about teaching them the value of individuality, I think, and the value of being true to yourself and not having to fit in. And again, giving presents that are valuable to your child because of their own personal interests, I think is a really good way of doing that. So you can definitely marry the two things up. If you are happy giving presents, then being sensitive to some of the social pressures, it can be helpful. And I think in my mind, you probably do a mixture of two. So you might give something that helps them feel part of a particular group or part of their peer group, but you might also want to give something that's very personal to them, that's really about how well you know them. Other people might not know those things, but if you really got it right, I think it's really helpful. What children absolutely do remember is when you give presents that really don't show them that really miss the mark. Children are actually fairly sensitive to that and will be really quite confused about why you might have wanted to get them something. Sometimes you're trying to do it because you're trying to expand their interest, and only you can know how far you can take your child with that. If your child is someone who really enjoys new things all the time, it might be a really good present to give. But if your child is someone who's really not that keen on trying new things, then probably Christmas is a bit of a tough time to try and do that, because present giving, as I said, is inherently about us knowing how much we're thought about, us knowing whether we have been kept in mind. And if your child is not someone who really likes trying new things, then probably Christmas isn't a great time to force that upon them. It might be other times that you explore that when, you know, there's not so much pressure, I think, on feeling that you're being understood and loved. So that's kind of my thoughts on present giving. Have a think about what's important to you. As I said, it's a good time to teach children some value about individuality. It's a good time to show them that you do know them very well and being sensitive to them. And I think that can really make for, you know, not necessarily very expensive gifts. You know, none of these things have to be expensive, because actually understanding what they really want, it can be something you make. You know, it depends, of course, what it is that matters to them, but it doesn't have to be anything expensive. And certainly kids don't usually measure what you give them by price. I think sometimes that competitiveness can happen a bit later on in life. Usually it's because they will have a peer group where this is discussed, especially in teenagers, where people will discuss about, oh, you know, my mum spent this much money, or this cost this much money. Again, you might want to think about whether that's a conversation you have with them about whether that really matters in life. It might be that you think it does matter, and therefore you do want to give them suitably expensive presents, but that's about you actually making that judgment. If the money you spend on presents is not something that you value personally, then I think it's important that you convey that value to your child and that you support them with that. If it is, if you think that expensive gifts are important and how much money is spent, then you can do that as well. But I think even if they're expensive, they still have to be something your child is, you know, is important to them. You can give very expensive presents, but if they're fairly meaningless to your child, it won't really have much effect. So have a think about those things and decide what kind of presents you want to do this year.